We recognize that the ways that we understand ourselves and relate to the world are influenced so much by the culture around us that we need a very comprehensive practice to transcend those limited ideas, the ways that we define ourselves. So much of the way that we behave, the way that we treat each other, the way that we pursue our goals is influenced by the prevailing messages of our culture, which have been drilled into our subconscious mind over many years. The messages of that culture to do good and be good and achieve things in order to be happy. Weekly yoga practice, meditating a few times a week, is not going to overcome that obstacle of all those ways of understanding. We need a more comprehensive practice that integrates into all the aspects of our lives. Since most people can't spend a lot of their days meditating and immersed in spiritual teachings and scripture study, I've been recommending very specific ways to integrate the teachings of yoga into their lives. A very simple way, for example, is to pause frequently throughout the day just to observe ourselves, to be aware of our physical posture, to be aware of our hearts and our emotional well-being, and our minds. Are we racing? Are we driven? Are we anxious? Just becoming more aware of our day-to-day feelings and condition is a way of bringing more mindfulness to everything that we do. If we really want to have our lives manifest in a way that's truly in harmony with what we value, we really need to think carefully about what do we consider the ultimate purpose of this lifetime? What do we really value? What do we really want to experience in this life? So I encourage people to take time to think about these big questions, and over time ask themselves these questions and formulate for themselves what they feel is the overall purpose for this lifetime. Then we can use that overall purpose as a guideline for the way that we do many things, for all the choices that we make. Pick one spiritual teaching and integrate that teaching into our day. Rather than taking chunks of time out of our schedule to practice, we simply choose a specific teaching like contentment or nonviolence, and we bring it with us into the way we do everything. We can post something like that somewhere on the mirror or at a desk where we will see it often, be reminded of the teaching, and simply keep that teaching in our hearts as we go through the day, as we make choices, as we pursue our tasks. That's a beautiful way to bring spiritual teaching into the daily life. To observe where we may have self-judgment or inner conflict. Many of us will suffer at various times. We may experience anger, disappointment, frustration, anxiety, even depression. And because those feelings are not so socially acceptable, we tend to be ashamed of them. We tend to hide them from others, and we may even repress them out of our own awareness, feeling uncomfortable with those things that don't make us look good. But that becomes an obstacle. That repression further enhances the suffering itself and prevents us from learning from those experiences. So what I recommend is looking more deeply into the nature of those experiences, like sadness. What caused my sadness? My anxiety? Why am I anxious? And if I can let myself feel those feelings and look more deeply into the root cause of them, I often can learn important lessons for my spiritual growth. So I recommend that we not avoid those difficult feelings, but we use them as opportunities to learn, that we have compassion for ourselves and realize that these are a natural part of the human experience. And we can use these experiences as part of our spiritual path. to have some spiritual practice, like a meditative practice, that we do on a regular basis. So this is something that I think we should fit into our daily routine, even if it's a small amount of time. To have a regular meditative practice is such a valuable thing. It has the potential to help us experience another aspect of our being, more subtle and much more powerful than our limited human minds. A meditative practice, when we quiet the mind, when we allow ourselves to disengage from all of that movement of thought, can bring into our awareness a deeper sense of peace and contentment that's always there. And when we feel that natural kind of contentment, we are much less apt to get anxious and worried about things that happen around us. So it can have tremendous benefits for us. A meditative practice also helps us learn how to focus the mind, how to develop our willpower, how to stay clear and calm even when life is stressful, how to approach stressful events in a more mindful way, responding consciously instead of reacting in a hasty way that only causes more trouble. So a meditative practice has so many benefits. I really recommend everyone develop some form of meditation practice that they do on a regular basis. It's what I call Sabbath time. I believe it's important for everyone to fit into their week some time away from their work, away from their responsibilities, just to nourish themselves in some way that brings joy to their hearts. Like spending time with your loved ones, like reading good books, walking in nature, even playing. Playing is a lost art. It shouldn't be only for children. Taking time for activities like this can enhance our lives in beautiful ways and bring balance from the tendency to be driven to constantly accomplish tasks and be productive at every hour. To bring our spiritual teachings into our livelihood, into our work life. Most people spend a lot of their time and energy earning a living, working at some job, accomplishing tasks, taking care of the household and the family. And if we think of all of that time as something separate from our spiritual lives, we miss the opportunity to integrate our spiritual teachings into that aspect of our lives. So I recommend finding ways to spiritualize that work life, that effort to accomplish tasks that we have on a regular basis. And this can be done simply by putting love into that work, by making our work an offering to God in some way, by putting our caring energy into that work, by feeling that we're acting as an instrument of the divine in some way, or simply by caring about the relationships with the other people we work with. Practicing the virtues that we learn from our study of the yoga teachings. Our work life, right, our life accomplishing things should give us ample opportunity to practice the things that we understand, to put them into everyday life expression. Supporting our goals, supporting our spiritual life in healthy ways. It's very difficult to pursue the spiritual path by yourself. Everyone needs good company, what we often call Sangha, the company of like-minded people, the company of other spiritual seekers, to remind us of the truth, to uplift us when we get low in our energy or depressed, when we're struggling, to have someone to reach out to. This can come in many forms. Taking a regular group yoga class, you get to know those people. Attending a weekly scripture study class or a weekly meditation with another group of people can be so supportive and inspirational. Even reading inspirational books can be a source of support and a reminder of the principles that we believe in. So I recommend that everyone have some of those forms of support in their lives so that they don't feel alone and become disheartened on the spiritual path. Another teaching that I found so useful in my own life is what I would call surrender. And I don't mean surrender in terms of being defeated, but surrender in terms of acknowledging the limitations of my mind. Bowing my head in surrender acknowledges that I don't always know the answer, that this limited ego mind can't itself tap into the wisdom of the spiritual self. But if I calm my mind, if I open my heart to receive guidance, I have found that that guidance is always available. Whether you think of that grace or guidance as coming from a source outside of ourselves, like a saint, a guru, or a form of God, a higher power, or whether you think of it as the inner guru, either way, that guidance becomes available when we're willing to acknowledge the limitations of this mind and open ourselves to receive guidance. So I have found praying that way for guidance, bowing my head, acknowledging the limitations of my own mind to be a very, very supportive practice. In that way, I link myself with a higher power. I allow the grace, the strength, the guidance of that higher power to support me and uplift me. So these are the things that I recommend most for the spiritual path. Any number of these can be integrated into the daily life without taking a lot of extra time. But unless we find some way of making the daily life a part of our spiritual path, it's very difficult to progress. It's very difficult to transcend the ego mind that we were given at birth and the messages of the culture that became deeply ingrained in our subconscious mind. But by regular practice, we can ingrain new principles, higher values, spiritual principles, and in a way reconstitute the structure of the subconscious mind based on these spiritual principles. So I hope that some of these ideas are helpful. May we all grow ever more aware of that deep peace that dwells within us. And allow that light, that spiritual light, to shine forth in the way that we act in day-to-day life, in the way that we treat each other, in the way that we contribute to the collective consciousness of our planet. Namaste. Thank you for listening. I hope what I've shared has been useful. Tune in again to hear more of the teachings that I can share with you. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy, love and light.